Greetings from Ankara to all participants and congratulate to all authors of the very book chapter. And thank you to the editors for their valuable contribution throughout the process. My chapter is about China's soft power understanding and its impact on Turkey's foreign policy in general. The idea has come to me when the Turkish policymakers more and more talk about the Chinese version of economic development and adopting that kind of practice in Turkey. We can see that more in the latest decade, especially in the domestic politics, when the Turkish economy is failing and the domestic audience need that kind of distraction that Turkey can achieve and succeed in a way that China happened. Actually, when we look at the Turkish politics, we can see the similar narratives in the 1950s that turning Turkey into a little America. That's the way that we can see the first sign of American soft power in Turkish politics, being like an American establishing the state, establishing a foreign policy mentality in a way that the United States had. But it is the first time during the latest decade that we can see that kind of sign having the same way that China had, especially in the economic development, so that Turkey can copy and reproduce it in a way that China succeeds in its own economic success. As Nye defined the soft power as a power of attraction, we can see that it is the way that Chinese soft power affects Turkish mindset. But as also Nye defined it, hard to use and hard to detect. It is very difficult to understand how, in which way that this narrative affect Chinese narrative affect Turkish mindset. But we can find some similarities. That's why I want to limit my scope throughout this project with the COVID-19 period and how Turkey and China deal with that kind of a global crisis and how they produce the similar narratives in a way that copying and reproducing the same understanding. First, we discuss with the editors how can we understand this soft power interaction between two countries, and they also give me a valuable contribution that we can add some kind of limitations in that interaction so that we add a bilateral crisis point as the Uyghur issue between two countries so that we can see, yes, they can interact in a way that soft power understanding, but also there are some difficulties and impediments in dealing with some major issues. When we see the China's approach to soft power, it is mainly based on culture-oriented at the beginning, because they said that even the concept itself has rooted in the ancient text of Chinese culture, and we can see some things in self-reliance in the ancient Chinese text, so that we can understand that kind of soft power understanding throughout the cultural roots of China. And of course, since the economic reform and opening up, we can see a clear development path of China, which can be summarized as the rise of China phenomenon. And it is a main vehicle to understand how China became a great power, a great economic capability, and a source of soft power in a sense that we can affect others to reproduce its own instruments. The culture is the main basis of Chinese soft power understanding, but also economy became the zenith of its soft power understanding, because the Chinese economic model and development model became the main interaction point, especially with the global south and the third world, that can be reproduced, and how China affect others, not only giving credits, not only investing their countries, but also leading the way that having same development path that China can achieve, low cost of production, that kind of need of foreign investment, etc., etc. And when we look at the latest publications about Chinese soft power interaction, especially Repnikova said that the idea of culture-oriented soft power or economy-oriented soft power is no longer valid in Chinese perspective, because political power may overpass and may accomplish that kind of soft power outcomes without that cultural features, cultural issues. And the concept, the soft power concept itself became a power issue, in a sense that China has developed that soft power understanding. We can see the same narrative in the president, whose understanding China has to develop its soft power. We cannot rely on hard power impediments, etc. But in the latest decade, Xi Jinping also said that China need to express its own image, need to better express itself. That's why it needs a much more significant role of media, and having developed a much important discourse to express itself. Why? Because they need to build an understanding that China is a global actor, but not only a global actor, but a responsible global actor, responsible great power, so that they need to express their understanding. We can see the same root in the foreign policy practices that can develop a benevolent image, especially during the pandemic crisis. We can see the vaccine diplomacy, we can see the mask diplomacy, we can see even China itself is dealing with the crisis in its own country. It is sending medical aids to other countries, especially in Europe. We can remember the Chinese help in Italy, etc. Not only the third world country, I mean. And it can build that responsible global actor image. It also emphasized that the lack of solidarity and lack of collaboration, even in the developed countries among themselves, and even, for example, in the European Union countries. That's why the good narrative and better communication is important to understand Chinese version of soft power, how can build that attraction, so that the power of attraction throughout this process. Of course, economic capability is the main source of this kind of building soft power instruments, so that the culture became an outcome of this economic power. How? We can see the opening up the Confucius Institutes, language courses, media facilities in different countries, and so that the media presence of Chinese narrative in different countries, it is based on the economic interactions and economic power that can be leveraged to have some soft power interaction. When we came to the Turkish version and how this understanding affects Turkey's vision, we can see three different compartments in understanding Turkish vision and soft power understanding. First one is the cultural one, the second one is the political one, and the third one is development and economic version of soft power. As we can see in Chinese version, Turkey also emphasized that it has a deep root in cultural tradition, it has a religious connection with different neighboring regions especially, so that it is a historical, cultural connection that can be built on Turkey's relations with other countries. And maintain that kind of relations with, especially with the neighboring region, is the main source of Turkey's interaction with other countries. As we can see in the political narrative, soft power is mainly used alongside with the hard power. Yes, we can, especially in presidents and prime ministers and ministers' discourses, yes, we can see that Turkey has to develop its soft power, but alongside with hard power. They cannot disregard the connection between two. And moreover, as we can see the political side of this narrative, the soft power understanding aims both domestic and foreign audiences. In many times, it also directs to the domestic audiences that we can see the same similarities between China and Turkey, that has a responsible actor as well as the benevolent image that can build a moral high ground in understanding their own country's approach to other states. When we look at the China's approach during the COVID crisis, we can see the same practices in Turkish foreign policy as well. They can reproduce this benevolent image and how they can send medical aids to other states, other societies, especially the global south and third world countries, and as well as in the neighboring countries that has built that moral ground, moral higher ground, and this benevolent image as China produced during the crisis. Of course, the primary focus is in Turkish soft power understanding is on its neighboring regions. It builds an historical narrative that can be reproduced throughout this process, but it has built the same narrative that China has, for example, in having relations with the African countries. We are not repeating the Western experiences. We are not exploiting your sources, or we are not a colonizer in these regions. We have deep roots culturally, religiously, etc. We can build win-win relations with our society and your society, our economy and your economy. We don't have that kind of a Western background so that we can build an option for your foreign relations. We have this kind of a moral ground so that we can have that kind of an equal relations with you, which can be resulted in this win-win relations in the outcome, in the final. In this political sense, we also need to mention that a Turkish model, which can be a very source of Turkey's soft power during the 2000s and early 2010, but as discussed in the literature, there is a rise and fall of Turkish model. It is a very prominent understanding that Turkey has a democratic regime. Turkey has a NATO alliance in the Middle East, as a Middle Eastern country in the Middle East, the only one country in the region, and it has an economic performance that can be understood as a success throughout this process. A Turkish economic model could be a model for its neighboring countries, as we can see in the China. So when this image became problematic throughout the 2010, and the Turkish economic performance is declining throughout these years, China filled the void that Turkish economy need for foreign investment, so that the interaction between two countries became much larger scale. And we can see that this Chinese model, I can assume in that sense, became much more prominent to adopt in Turkish foreign policy makers and Turkish elites to understand how Turkey can adopt that kind of thing. There is not a clear copying, but in the mindset, we can see that always a reference to the Chinese model. How can we develop same success so that we can be a same global actor that China has developed? As we can see in the Chinese perspective, how they need to be better understood by others, they have much more emphasis on media presence and investment on that. We can see the same in the Turkish soft power interaction, the Turkish movies, Turkish TV series, and presence of Turkish media abroad. We can see the same, copying the same understanding and practices in Turkish foreign policy as well throughout the cultural institutions. China has the Confucius Institutes, Turkey has Yunus Emre Institutes, for example. Especially during the COVID-19 crisis, we can see copying the same narrative and practices. We all can remember that China has built a hospital, for example, in a very rapid way. Same thing happened in Turkey, that the Turkish policymakers advertise it in a way that we can achieve the same and rapid success. They opened, for example, a hospital in a collaboration with Japan, which is called Cham and Sakura, Turkish Pine and Japanese Cherry Hospital in Istanbul to fight against the COVID-19 virus, for example. And we can see that China has published a white paper how China deal with the COVID-19 crisis, how it helps other countries to deal with that crisis. We can see the same narrative and same publications few months later in Turkey that, let me say this, its exact name, Turkey's successful fight against COVID-19, global pandemic of the century. It has published by the Communication Directorate of the Presidency. And we can see the same benevolent image in Turkey that China has produced throughout this process. For example, we can see the same mask diplomacy, the same vaccine diplomacy, even though Turkey had developed its own vaccine much later than China, Sinovac, as you can know, and Turkey developed Turkovac. Even the name is the same sound when we look at this kind of image. But more importantly, Turkey has also emphasized that the lack of solidarity, lack of cooperation between countries, especially when the crisis hits the global south, and how this benevolent actor can help others in a way that China did in its approach to other countries. As Nai explained the soft power as a power of attraction, it is hard to use, hard to detect, but easy to lose, as in Turkish soft power, the rise and fall of Turkish model and the deteriorated Turkish economy can also produce the same easy to lose understanding of Nai's soft powers, the power of attraction, and costly to re-establish. When you lose that kind of a ground, it is much difficult to understand. When we look at the critics on Turkish foreign policy, it can be feel that there is a costly outcomes, that the fall of Turkish model, fall of Turkish economic success, and the critics on its neo-Ottoman heritage, etc. But I like to mention the last section, the impediments between two countries and China's soft power barrier in Turkey, which is about the bilateral crisis between two countries, especially the Uyghur issue. We need to limit the scope of analysis so that we just pick this issue. When we look at this issue between two countries, there is a huge impact because the policymakers had ups and downs regarding this crisis. For example, in 2009, President Erdogan, at that time Prime Minister, defined China's approach to the crisis as a genocide. Then a long silence came in Turkish policymakers regarding the Uyghur issue, and that has criticized by the foreign authors especially, that this Chinese investment became an impediment, became a leverage for China to silence Turkish critics regarding this issue. But when we look at the public opinion, for example, lastly, I need to mention it, there is not a huge consent on that Turkey, being a part of this crisis, actively participate the international community in order to deal with this issue, because when Turkey became an active partner of that kind of a crisis, can be not outcome for Turkey's national benefit, etc. The recent polls that I had in my final section, we can see that only the 30% is for Turkey's participation. The rest is either the absent, against, or has no idea that regarding the Uyghur issue could be a real deal between two countries. But the majority of that, as that public poll demonstrate that the interaction between two countries has to be based on economic development and had to be continued throughout these years. I'd like to thank the organizers as well as the editors, and if there is any questions before I will present the next authors, I'm glad to answer their questions.